Hey everyone, this is the third talk of the eighth edition of the Legacy of Socrates, and I have the pleasure to have Clare Sudbery here. If you don't know Clare, she's a lead engineer at MedTech. Oh, sorry, MedTech. She also is a math graduate with 21 years of software experience, and she loves teaching, mentoring a lot. So for that reason, they have an academy. I will drop the link, but people in the UK who want to become software developers, if you know such people, then you can provide them with this link. Uh, Claire is an amazing teacher. She hosts a podcast called Making Tech Better, and I recently listened to it, and she had an amazing episode with Emily Bash, who we had previously. And I know Emily, I think you are here in the audience, about refactorings and a lot of wisdom on how you deal with existing code and existing teams. And that I also recommend you to have a look. Today, she is covering a topic I think is important. I like to have speakers who don't just talk about technicalities and test and code, but also about the team you're working with, the people you're working with. And today, Claire is going to talk about let's stop making each other feel stupid. I think it's awesome. So, without further ado, Claire, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. So, hello, my name's Clare Sudbery, and I am indeed a software engineer, and I have been for 21 years. And currently, I'm leading our academy. So, thank you for the reminder to talk about that. I work with maketech. We're a consultancy. We help people to develop effective software, and we particularly specialize in the public sector. And just to give you a little bit more information about our academy, we will be teaching 12 engineers for 12 weeks, starting at the beginning of February, end of January. And applications are open now and they close on the 30th of November. It is UK only. So just wanted to get that little plug in. But because I teach the academy and also because I used to be an ex high school maths teacher, I'm particularly interested in how we can facilitate people to be confident and to be able to be happy and productive as software engineers, and how we can help to facilitate. I don't necessarily even want to say teach. I think my job is more of a facilitator than a teacher. But when we're developing effective software, it isn't just about the computers. It isn't just about the code. And Nicholas also mentioned the Making Tech Better podcast, and Paula Paul was one of our guests there. And one of the things that she said was the technology is the easy part. Really, it's all about the people. And that's what I'm going to be talking about. And again, before I start, I'm always interested in hearing feedback. So any ideas for how I can improve the talk, or if you want to tell me how great it was, that's also nice to hear. So yeah, any feedback is good to hear. Okay, so imagine a world where there was no imposter syndrome and you could arrive at work excited about learning new things every day, and you never had to worry about not knowing enough. Wouldn't that be fantastic? Because being an effective IT professional is not actually about what you know. We all think it is, and we often restructure our recruitment as though that's what it's about. And the fact that we think that's what it is causes a lot of problems. So I'm going to talk about the following problems. I'm going to talk about their impacts, and I'm going to talk about what we can do to make things better. So I'm going to talk about judging people, about laughing at people, about talking in jargon, and I'm going to talk about the fact that we're often reluctant to train juniors. There's a lot of gatekeeping that happens in this industry. The idea of rockstar developers, I'll go into. I don't think it's a good one. The idea that everyone knows more than me, and I don't literally just mean me, I mean that often all of us have that thought in our head. And there's also a problem when we feel like we're not allowed to show the fact that we don't know things, so we try to hide our ignorance. The idea that the seniors are the ones that know the most is also problematic, I think. And I also think something that's problematic is the idea that tech is the hardest part of developing software, because I don't actually think that it is. But I'm going to dig into all of those in more detail. But before I do that, I'm going to tell you a little story. which gives you some idea about why I care so much about all of this. So I'm asking you to close your eyes. You don't have to, but you might want to. And I'm going to tell you a story. So, once upon a time, there was a woman. She was a software engineer. She had a background in maths. Therefore, she was used to being in a minority. Studying maths at university, she was one of maybe 5 or 10% of women. So she was also used to the idea that women can't do maths. And this was actually reinforced by her experience, because if only 10% of the maths undergraduates are female, then maybe that's because women can't do maths. So she's already used to this idea that women are inferior, women aren't as clever. And then she quite late came into the industry, the IT industry. And in her very first job, so, having studied maths, she didn't start learning how to even really use computers until after she graduated from a maths degree. And in her first job as a software engineer, she was quite intimidated because it was all men. She was the only woman. And it seemed like they'd all been programming since they were in nappies, like since they were small children. They seemed to have been doing it forever, whereas she'd only just started learning about all of this. And as she moved through her career in her next job, she kept asking to work on the more complex stuff, which looked more interesting, but she kept being told no. And it wasn't clear to her why, but it seemed like it could have been just because she was a woman and nobody really thought that she would be capable of doing the more complex work. And then she had an interview for a more senior position and was faced with incredulity by her interviewer, who couldn't believe that she knew as little as she did, and said, "No, you can't possibly do this job." And so when after 12 years she was made redundant, it was a relief. She didn't want to work in IT anymore. She didn't feel that she had the skills. She didn't feel that she fitted in. Now, it probably isn't going to be any great surprise that that woman was me. That was my experience. I did, in fact, leave the IT industry altogether after 12 years, and I became a high school maths teacher, which was actually not a fantastic success, I have to say. I much prefer teaching software engineering to adults. Teaching maths to teenagers is hard. Teenagers don't like maths. I mean, most people don't like maths, but teenagers in particular don't like maths. So I left the IT industry because I felt inadequate. I was always feeling stupid. But the thing is that coming back into the industry, I noticed more and more that I wasn't the only person who was feeling stupid. Because I did come back into the industry, which is why I'm here now. And I really started to pay attention to how my colleagues, my direct reports, my mentees were all also feeling inadequate. They were suffering from imposter syndrome. And I started to think about the behaviors that were causing this. So I'm going to run through some of those behaviors. I'm going to talk about their impacts, and I'm talk about some ways that we could maybe do things differently. So I'm talking about making each other feel stupid. One of the ways in which this happens is that when we talk negatively about other people. So what we'll do is we'll judge people based on what they know. So one example of this that I've seen happen many times is I've heard somebody say, "Wow, I've just discovered that," somebody else, a colleague, "doesn't understand why, and I'm shocked about this." This is something I've heard people say. Or I've heard people say, "Can you believe I've just interviewed this developer and they didn't even know what a Z was?" And people love telling each other these stories of, "Oh my gosh, can you believe, how could somebody come to an interview not knowing about something which they believe is absolutely crucial? And you couldn't possibly be an effective software developer if you didn't know about a particular thing." Um, but of course, and the impact that it has is not just on the people you're talking about, because it's very tempting to think that, "Oh, well, it was all right because the person I was talking about was not in the room, so they don't get impacted by this." But what does happen is the people you're talking to get impacted by it, because even if you're not making a direct judgment of them, what they're thinking is, "Oh, are people saying that about me behind my back? Do I need to worry about people judging me because there's something I don't know about? Do I have to constantly monitor myself to make sure I don't show the cracks? Make sure I don't let people know. If people around me are talking about something I haven't heard of before, I'll have to pretend that I have, because I don't want them to go away and say to each other, "Oh my gosh, can you believe so and so just told us that they didn't know about this thing that we think is crucial?" So that thing about judging people for what they know, it's not helpful. It doesn't it's not helpful. It's also not valid, because the range of knowledge in this industry is so wide. It is possible to be a highly proficient software professional and still have huge gaps. And that doesn't mean that you can't still be very good at your job. It just means you haven't had occasion to learn those things. So the next one is laughing at people. So this happens. This can happen quite commonly when we talk about family members, and actually, one of the most common one is mothers, which I particularly notice because I am a mother. But it's a fun little joke that we can have with each other. We can tell each other about, oh my gosh, my mum didn't know. My mum can't work this. My mum didn't understand this. My mum thought she'd deleted the internet. Ha ha, very funny. And again, the problem with that, and we can tend to feel like we're in a club, like we're the IT professionals. So we're allowed to laugh at all the people who aren't IT professionals, who don't know the stuff that we know. But again, whenever you laugh at somebody, everyone around you is taking that in and thinking, I must make sure that I don't become one of those people who is laughed at. And it also means that you're just not taking account of the fact that some people have learned some things and some people haven't. That's not a reason for ridicule. And the impact of this, I think, is one of the big impacts is imposter syndrome. So, because we know that people are judging one another, we're all worried that they might judge us. We all know what our own deficiencies are. We all know about the things that we don't know. And we can get the idea that everybody else knows everything. And because we know that we don't, we feel like we shouldn't be here, like we're an imposter, like we're going to get found out. But if everybody is worried that they're going to get found out, that makes no sense, because actually the fact is that we do all have knowledge gaps. And the way to avoid this is to have empathy. So when you meet somebody who doesn't know something, instead of finding that funny or making a joke about it or laughing at them for it, think about the times when there have been things that you didn't know. Think about the time when you didn't know whatever the thing is that they don't know, because there was a time when that was true. Try to put yourself into other people's shoes. Okay, so the next one is talking in jargon. And one of the things that I've noticed is that quite often the people who use the most jargon are the people who are most worried about trying to fit in. So I'm going to tell another little story. So imagine I'm late to a meeting. And I'm going to walk into the meeting, and I'm late. I'm a bit flustered. So I arrive and say, "Oh, hi, sorry I'm late." And they're going to say, "It's fine. We were just talking about the ARM processor." And I go, "Oh, yes, of course." And I'm thinking, ARM. Oh, ARM. Oh, no. I know I've heard of that before. ARM. Oh, what is it? Meanwhile, they're saying some other stuff, which I've completely missed because I'm too busy panicking about the fact that I can't remember what ARM means. But eventually I say, look, I'm so sorry, but I've forgotten what ARM stands for. At which point they might say, oh, it's the articulated retention matriculation. And I'm like, oh no, I have no idea what that is. Never mind, never mind. I'll just work it out as I go along. And then they might say, oh, no, actually, you should be considering the AMRM at this point. And I'm like, what? A? And they're saying, that's the articulated meta retention matriculation. It's all a document. Why don't you hide for your expertise in this area? Really, we need to move on. Someone else might say at that point, that's a very good point. We definitely need to get meta at this point. And I'm now thinking, oh no, I was only just following what was happening, but now they've completely lost me. They're talking about meta. What does meta mean in this context? What does meta mean in any context? It's one of those concepts that signifies that things are about to get confusing. That's all I know. And then somebody else might say, Somebody else might be thinking, I don't really know what I just said, but people seem to be agreeing with me. And I said the word juncture. I love saying the word juncture. So what's often happening in these situations is that people are using complex language to hide the fact that actually they also feel uncomfortable, or to celebrate the fact that they feel like they've finally arrived. So I've definitely had that experience where people are using terminology that I don't understand. And then I finally do understand it. And at that point, I overuse it because I'm so proud of myself and I'm so excited that, yes, now I know the long words. So I'm going to use all the long words. But the problem with that is that, okay, so now I'm now in the club, I'm now a member of the gang, but the next new person that arrives isn't going to be. And if I again deride them for not understanding and not knowing the language, then all that does is repeat the problem. So the obvious solution is to think about whether people are understanding what you're saying and pay attention. Explain. If you use a term that you think might not be understandable, explain it. Don't even wait for somebody to ask. Try not to use initials. Obviously, there will be times when you know that everybody in the room understands, and we use shortcuts. We do use shortcuts to make conversation easier, make communication easier, but we have to make sure that that is actually having the effect we want it to, and that people do understand what we're talking about. So try not to assume, and also try not to fall into the trap of making yourself look clever by using all the complicated terms. So another problem that we have in this industry is that people are reluctant to train juniors. They say they don't have time. I can't spend my whole time teaching people. I just want to get the job done. I need people who can hit the ground running. I don't want to employ juniors because I just want them to be able to arrive and do the job. But the problem with this, with a clear, obvious problem, which is recruitment, there aren't enough senior people in this industry. Everybody struggles to find people. And also, it can mean that if you're not willing to teach other people, then effectively what you're doing is you're hoarding your own knowledge rather than sharing it. And actually, everybody benefits when we teach one another what we learn. And it's not just the people we're teaching that benefit, it's also ourselves. Because every time you teach something and explain something, you actually consolidate your own knowledge. And nearly always, you'll probably find that there was some aspect of it that you're not quite clear about and that you have to confirm in order to be able to teach it to somebody else, and you benefit from that. But there are also lots of other benefits, which is that if you have a team with juniors in, yes, it might slow things down a bit, but actually slowing things down is good. We quite often move too fast. We're quite often in a rush, and we don't spend enough time thinking about what we're doing. And when you have to explain what you're doing to somebody else, that forces you to think about it. It also means that it helps to counter assumptions. So it can be very easy when you're in a team of all seniors, then everybody assumes that everybody knows what's going on and that they're all in agreement about what they're doing. So they don't even bother to discuss things in detail. And actually, that's almost always a wrong assumption. Even senior people can be miscommunicating, can be making assumptions, can actually be moving in different directions without even realizing it. So you benefit from having juniors there because you have to be explicit about what you're doing. You have to explain what's happening, and everybody benefits from that. I have a whole other talk on training because obviously, because I run the academy at maketech, I actually have 2 talks about the academy and about training up juniors. But everybody benefits when you're willing to put that effort in. The other thing that you can do is encourage everybody, not just juniors, encourage everybody in your organizations and your teams to explore and experiment and learn without risk. The risk comes when people feel they will be judged, or when people feel they won't be given time to explore and experiment and learn. And that's when things start going wrong. So if you celebrate learning and encourage everybody at all levels to always be learning, because we always all are. I mean, I talk about senior developers as there's this kind of magical thing, these magical beings that are fully formed, and that when you become a senior developer, that's it, no more learning. You've got all the knowledge, it's all crammed into your brain, no more required. And that's just nonsense, particularly with the size of this industry. There's so much to learn. We're all learning all the time. So we are all juniors. And if we create that kind of apartheid between juniors and seniors, we're creating a lot of problems. We have to celebrate learning. And also, you can have explicit statements to newcomers and at the start of meetings that you have a policy towards curiosity, that you encourage curiosity. And you can also encourage one another to give one another feedback if you're not living up to those ideals, if you're not encouraging curiosity. You can make that a part of your culture and you can be explicit about that. And I love this cartoon. I share this cartoon in several of my talks. There's a lot of text there, so you don't have to read it all. I'll walk you through it. But this is XKCD. If you haven't come across his cartoons, go and seek him out. You probably have because he is ubiquitous. But if you haven't, seek him out because he's amazing. But this is what he's talking about here is about making fun of people when they admit that they don't know things. And he's done some maths, which is spurious maths, it has to be said. But he's done some maths. He's made some assumptions about how many people about the idea that there might be something that everybody will have heard of by the time they're 30 years old. And then he looks at the US birth rate, and therefore he does some maths and decides that therefore there will be 10,000 people learning about this thing for the first time every day. And he uses an example, the Diet Coke and Mentos thing, which is the thing about if you put a Mento in a bottle of Coke, it creates this kind of fountain, this explosion. And what he's saying is that if you make fun of people when they admit that they don't know a thing, the example being the Diet Coke and Mentos thing, then you're missing out on the fun of being the person who gets to teach them about it. So if instead of saying, "Oh my God, I can't believe you don't know that thing," you say, "Wow, brilliant, you don't know that thing. That means I get to show you that thing." In this case, it's the amazing explosion of Coke coming out of a bottle. And that makes you one of today's lucky 10,000. And I love this idea of the lucky 10,000, that every day there's somebody who's learning something new. And if you get to be a part of that experience, then you are lucky and they are lucky too. So we celebrate learning instead of deriding a lack of knowledge. So another problem that we have is gatekeeping. So when I say gatekeeping, what I'm talking about is narrow recruitment policies where we say you can't be in our gang, you can't join our company, you can't be a part of this thing unless you know all the things. And then what we tend to do is we construct technical tests and we construct interview questions in a way that massively narrows the pool of people who might be able to apply or be successful. And then we complain that we can't find the right people. And the solution to this is to ask what is actually required for competency. And it often isn't knowing every single nut and bolt of a particular language. Those are things that we all learn on the job all the time, that we have to learn on the job all the time. What's more important is how effective people are at communicating, how open they are to learning, whether they have an aptitude and an attitude towards learning. And if people don't know enough, why is that? What's deterring them? What can you do about it? So obviously you can run academy programs, you can look for career changes, you can run boot camps, you can say that just because somebody doesn't have a degree doesn't mean that they're not a highly proficient professional that's able and willing to learn and that may have already learned on the job. Yeah, sorry, I was just checking, did I have another point about that? I don't. So the thing is that the range of knowledge in this industry is very wide. It's very wide. You can't see, or maybe you can see. My hands are right out. There is an awful lot of knowledge in this industry. And just because somebody hasn't encountered the thing that you think they need to know doesn't mean they wouldn't be an asset. So don't ask whether people have what you think you need. Instead, ask whether what they do have. So don't ask about whether they have the thing that you think they need to have. Ask them what they do have. So give them the chance to showcase their skills and their strengths that you might not even have thought of would be important. So instead of putting people in interview situations and basically putting them into a situation of a lack of trust, where they have to prove to you that they're good enough and you're assuming they're not, instead, assume they are good enough, assume they're amazing, give them a chance to shine, give them a chance to tell you all of the things about them that are wonderful, and be prepared for some of those things to be things you hadn't even thought of. So another problem that we have is the idea of the rockstar developer. And this is the idea that you want to recruit rockstar developers even. So there's a whole book by Joel Spolsky on recruitment where he talks about recruiting rockstar developers, and I have to say I just totally disagree. Um, Apart from anything else, what you're doing there is you're looking for the people who are hyper confident, who think quite possibly think of themselves as being better than everybody else, and is used to hoarding that knowledge and not sharing it, is used to being put on a pedestal, rather than being down in the weeds with the rest of us, learning and teaching together as a team, rather than everything. It also means that everything gets put in their laps and they tend to get overloaded, and then it's even harder for them to share their knowledge. It's also worth knowing that a lack of confidence disproportionately affects underrepresented groups. So people want to fit in, and if they feel like nobody looks like them, they won't. And the rockstar developers tend to be the white men. They don't tend to be people from those underrepresented groups. And what you're likely to be doing is to be furthering that problem. So another problem that we have is actually one that we can suffer from as individuals, which is when we assume that everybody else knows more than us. And I don't want to be victim blaming here, but we should all be helping one another to get over that, because it's not helpful. So I like to show people this, which is I call the wheel of confusion. That's me at the bottom. And the people all the way around me were my colleagues at Thoughtworks. So we were actually at a work do one evening, and I persuaded everybody to let me take photos of them, looking happy and confident. That's what I told them. That was their brief. And the idea is, in Thoughtworks, and I'm sure lots of organisations have similar things, there is an internal message board where people talk about various technical topics. And because Thoughtworks is a big organisation, this has a lot of topics on a lot of subjects. And it's very tempting to look at all of the titles of all the threads and go, I don't know anything about any of these things. Look at all of these people. Look how confident they are. Look how much they know. They all know about all of these things. There's Andy who knows about encryption, and Anik who knows about PySpark, etc., etc. But the thing is, what you're not taking into account is that meanwhile, Andy is looking at everybody else who seems to know all of the things about all of the things, and he's thinking, oh no, I don't know anything about any of those things. Meanwhile, Anik is feeling the same way, and so is Ezra, and so is Georgia, and so is Ileana, and so is John, and so is Kirsty, and so is Mircea, and so is Rob, and so is Scott. They're all worrying about all of the things that all of the other people know. And what they're not realizing is that each of these people is confident about one or two small areas. But just because they're appearing confidently in these threads and talking about what they do know, what you're not seeing is what they don't know. And what you're also not taking account of is what you know. You're only focusing on what you don't know. And we have a tendency as well, I think a lot of us, I certainly do, to compare ourselves to the best parts of the best people. So we look at the people who stand out, and we look at their strengths, and then we compare ourselves to those, and we compare all of our weaknesses to all of the best strengths of the best people. And what we're not doing is looking at their weaknesses, because everybody has them. And so it's really hard, but try to remember that nobody knows everything. It is impossible. There is no one person. In fact, you could easily find two adjacent professionals who are very senior, very successful, and who share almost no knowledge. They don't know the same things as each other, but they both know a lot, because our industry is just, there is so much in it. You cannot know everything. So yes, try not to. Try to pay attention to the fact that other people are also confused. And the other thing that it's a really good idea to not do is don't hide your own ignorance. I'm going to miss out a quick story there because I'm running out of time. But it what you can often do is project this sort of sheen of knowledge to protect yourself from judgment. And the problem is that that limits you as well as others. Because when you don't tell people when you're confused, then you don't get what you need. You don't get to find out. And it can mean that you make mistakes as well because you don't want to admit that you don't know what you're doing. And the solution to that is to ask questions and admit when you don't know. And not just ask questions yourself, but encourage other people to ask questions. So I ask questions all the time. I'm permanently confused. And most of the time, I manage to be honest about that. And by doing that, what I do is I help the people around me, particularly the more junior people, to know that that's okay, that it's all right. Because if Claire's doing it and she's really senior, then it must be okay. That means I can do it too. And there's also something about how you ask questions. So you can, there's more than one way of asking questions. One way of doing it is to say, "Oh God, I'm really sorry, I'm really confused, I don't understand, and I'm really stupid, sorry." That's not a good way of asking questions. A much better way of asking questions is to say, right, okay, to confidently say, even if you don't feel confident, this is one of those kind of act it to make it true. To confidently say, right, I understand this bit here, and I understand this bit here, but this bit here is confusing me because this is the thing that I don't understand. Explain why you're confused and do it in a way that you assume that that's okay. Why would it not be? Of course, it's okay because we all have things that we're confused by. We all have things that we don't know. And then, far from people judging you, what actually happens when you do it like that is people respect you for it. People will actually say to each other, "Oh, isn't the way that Claire asks questions great?" And what they don't say is, "Oh my God, Claire knows nothing," even though Claire is constantly asking questions, because the way that you do it can make a real difference, and it can really help other people as well. So, don't think that you should know more than everyone else. And that particularly applies to people who are in leadership and senior positions. It can be tempting, particularly if you're leading a team, if you're a technical lead, to think, I'm supposed to know everything. And I can't, if I admit that there are things that I don't know, or if my team know more than me, that means I shouldn't really be in this job. And it also means that people won't respect me, and it will also mean that I will worry everybody, and all my juniors will start to panic because they'll think if she doesn't know what's going on, then we're lost. But actually, it's you don't need to know more than everyone else, and particularly if you're in a leadership position, you should expect and desire for the senior people in your team to know more than you, because they're the people who are actually they're the hands-on people who are doing the work. And even if you are also hands-on, it is fine for other people to know more than you. That just means that they can teach you, and that means you have a strong team who knows what they're doing. It's not a problem. It should be something to be celebrated. And then another one is just assuming that the tech is the hard part. I mean, obviously, it can be hard writing software. I'm not saying it's easy, but that isn't necessarily the hardest part. The hardest part is coordinating people to get things done. The hardest part is agreeing on what needs to be done. The hardest part is communicating and collaborating with one another. And if we're judging one another, and if we're making each other feel stupid, then all of that gets even harder. So I started with a sad story about my career, and I'm going to end with a happy story. So I did leave the industry. I can't remember when that was, around about 2009, I think. And then I came back into the industry around about 2011, 2012. So it's nearly 10 years ago now. And what I did, because I'd been teaching, I think that really helped. I'd been teaching teenagers in the gap. So when I came back, I was hungry to learn. I'd been jealous of those teenagers. I remember once I was teaching a class, and one of my pupils said to me, I'd asked them to do some piece of work, and one of my pupils said to me, "Oh, miss, it's all right for you. All you have to do is stand there." And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, you have no idea. But what I said was, I wish I was you. I wish I got to just sit down in a classroom all day long and have people pump knowledge into my brain. Like, I'm jealous, and I understand being a teenager is hard, and it doesn't feel like that for them, and it's not easy. And that was that was a bit of a a trivial pat answer. But when I came back into the industry, I was so hungry to learn. I deliberately came back in at a lower level than I'd left so that I didn't have to pretend I knew stuff. I just said, listen, I'm an empty vessel, fill me up, treat me as a junior, pretend that I've never been a software engineer before. But obviously, because I had 12 years of experience, even though I didn't think I was coming back, it meant that I learned quickly. But it also meant that I was just really open about the fact that I was learning and that I wanted to learn. And what that actually meant was that had a really positive impact on my career. People respected that and celebrated it, and it meant that I progressed really quickly because I celebrated learning and I made no secret of that fact. So admitting ignorance was actually one of the big factors for success. So I'm going to finish off with this thing that I call the stupidity manifesto. And there's a nice little quote there from a guy called Aaron Swartz, who sadly has died, but he used to work for Thinkworks. It says, be curious, read widely, try new things. What people call intelligence just boils down to curiosity. So the stupidity manifesto, let's stop making people feel stupid. Instead, let's have an explicit policy of curiosity towards all things. Let's encourage each other to shout out if we discourage curiosity. Let's ask what people need to know rather than what they do know. Let's never judge someone because their knowledge doesn't match ours. And let's give our colleagues every opportunity to learn and explore without risk. Let's give new people a chance to show us what they can do. And let's encourage everyone to ask questions, because we have to acknowledge the broad range of knowledge in our industry, because our industry never stays the same. Let's remember that we all forget stuff, and let's lead by example. Let's be honest when we're confused. Let's focus on aptitude rather than knowledge. And let's remember what it feels like when we're still learning. Let's prioritize clarity over jargon. And remember, this is not idealism. This is pragmatism. This is how we move forwards if we stop making each other feel stupid. So I encourage people to have a think about things that they can do to make things better, because the most useful talks are the ones that result in action. I'm going to skip over the next bit. There's resources and references. I didn't actually mention Delusions Agenda in this talk, but that's a very interesting book about how one of the things it mentions is stereotype threat, that if you're in an underrepresented group, you're likely to absorb the idea that you can't do things, and that actually impacts your ability to do things. There are some other links in there. I can share these slides. And then we are going to do questions and discussion. But before we get to that, I'm going to do this bit now so I don't forget. So we've already mentioned the podcast, but you can get to it via that link. At maketech, we are recruiting. So you can go to maketech.com/careers. We've got loads of positions open. And of course, I haven't got a slide in here for the Academy because we've only just recently started recruiting. But the closing date is the 30th of November, and there was a link shared before. But I think we do have time for questions and discussion.
Yes, we do. Thank you very much. That was an awesome talk and cool story you shared with us. Thank you very much for this. So I'm leaving a little time here for people to drop their questions, but there is a bunch of activity in the chat already. People are loving, yeah, the tech is not the hardest. True. Also, the wheel of confusion, that is an awesome visualization. Thank you, Claire, for doing that. Nice illustration. Okay, there is Alex, yeah, who is, it's more mentioning, it's not really a question, it's more referring to the problem is like how company measure people performance, for instance. So like, oh, if you interrupt the senior developer, then they're less productive. So don't do that. And then you prevent learning. Do you have any, I would say, advice on how to like spark a change in your company culture to stop this kind of approaches?
I think one of the things is about modeling behavior. So it's about trying to find the confidence to ask lots of questions and be honest when you don't know things, and also to share celebration of learning. So one really useful thing can be, if you learn something new, tell everybody. Tell everybody that you've learnt it, teach it to them, talk about how you learnt it, talk about the experience of learning it, so that you're encouraging people to also have those experiences, and and if you can show the benefits as well. So for instance, if you learn a useful little tool or find a useful little way of doing things that benefits the whole team, point it out, point out the time that you spent on it, and suggest that time be deliberately put aside for people to do that because of the benefits, because you can show why it's useful. Um, and there's an interesting thing actually that Alex said about, in some cases it makes sense to teach people, and in some cases you have to allow others to fail. And that is a very good point. So it can be tempting when you are teaching people to just tell them how to do things, rather than say, you know what, if you explore this, then this will help you to learn. Give them ways of practicing and exploring, and therefore having the opportunity to fail. Because when people experiment and try things out and explore things, then they make mistakes and they get things wrong. But when that happens and then they put it right and they're given the opportunity to put it right, what they learn as a result sticks much better than if they've just been told how to do something.
Yeah, that's true. And that reminds me that for legacy code, for instance, you have a lot of coding exercises that are like safe playground that you can use to have people practice somewhere all of these new skills that they probably never learned before, and they don't necessarily have the time to learn that. So maybe if you have a difficult culture in your company, you can set up a meeting with engineers. Usually meetings that are fine. And during that time, you spend time together, exploring all of this on some coding exercise together, and that's the knowledge you share between you when you're doing that, that is really valuable and
Yeah.
will benefit
Yeah,
the.
and a couple of resources actually. There is a really nice website called. No, is that the right one? Oh, actually, no. It's I can never remember what it's called. This is annoying. So I was looking at Coder Dojo, which is also a really nice organisation, which is an organisation that encourages people to set up dojos. But I think unless they've completely changed their website, I don't think that's the one I was thinking of. There is oh, how annoying. There is a website that was set up by Seb Rose and a bunch of other people where you can go and practice katas.
Catalogs, maybe.
Not that that is also a good one. Yes, it
Yeah,
wasn't
okay.
that one, but that's a good one. Code Wars is another good one. And also,
Oh,
you mentioned Emily Bache before. Emily Bache has a GitHub that has tons and tons and tons of refactoring exercises in tons of different languages. They're really useful as well. My mind has gone blank about what the other thing was, but anyway, yeah, there are loads of resources out there.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. And we will share that. If that gets back to your mind, we will put that in the YouTube
Yes,
description of the video.
thank you.
We do have common question from Petty, which is, in other words, isn't it all about psychological safety? What do you think?
That is a very good point, and I did intend to mention psychological safety, and I didn't. So thank you for bringing it up. It's all about the psychological safety, and what I mean by that is that people feel safe to be vulnerable, and if you don't feel safe to be vulnerable, then that means that you hide things. And actually, you can create psychologically safe environments by encouraging people to share other bits of their lives. You have to be careful because you certainly don't want to force people to. People have different levels of comfort. But if you can share your whole self and you can bring your whole self to work, then what you can do is encourage other people to do the same. And when that happens, then people feel able to be vulnerable with one another, which also means that they can happily admit the things that they don't know. And that doesn't happen if you don't have psychological safety. Okay, I found the link. Sorry, I was looking it up while I was talking, and it turns out that there's more than one cyber dojo. I think there's cyber dojo with no hyphen in it, and then there's cyber dojo with a hyphen in it, Oh, Coder Dojo was
Mm,
the other thing that I found. This is Cyber Dojo. There you go. Cyber Dojo. It's just a really nice. It's a really really nice site. You can go. It has tons and tons and tons of katas in it, and you can work in teams or as individuals. It works really well for meetups. It's a very nice little tool.
nice. Well, thank you for sharing. I didn't know this one. Awesome. Well, I think that's it. We're on time, so we're gonna take a 15 minutes break. Set up Jay, who will conclude that conference with showing you how to do refactorings when you don't have tests. How do you do that? So cool techniques. But thank you. I want to thank you, Claire, because that was a very great presentation. You shared a lot of very interesting and impactful stories, and you shared a lot of great advice that we can all use from now on. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.